The federal government approved a 2.18 trillion naira supplementary budget for 2023, covering defense, infrastructure, and social welfare. The Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, Abubakar Bagudu, stated that this includes 605 billion naira for defense and security, 300 billion naira for bridge repair and road maintenance, some 210 billion naira for wage awards, 400 billion naira for cash transfers, 200 billion naira for agriculture, some 100 billion naira for the Federal Capital Territory, as well as 18 billion naira for electoral commission activities and 5.5 billion for student loans, 8 billion for new ministries, and 200 billion for urgent regional projects. Now, this is in line, or rather, this is in addition to the previously approved 21.83 trillion naira. Now, Gospel Obele, Chief Economist, Streetnomics, joins me to look at this right now. Gospel, welcome again to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, Tolu.
So we have about 2 months to the end of the year because October November is not knocking on the door. It's here with us now. So in terms of getting in a supplementary budget, what do you think prompted the need for a supplementary budget? Are we seeing unforeseen circumstances or even urgent requirements that would have necessitated this additional funding for the fiscal year of 2023?
I mean, no doubt there have been so many uncertainties on the table, and the Nigerian economy actually needs lots and loads of very targeted interventions, to support and relax the pressure when it comes to, the impact of these cost of living crisis and the rest on the average Nigerian. You also want to consider the fact that, there's still a gross lack of, infrastructure amenities that, meets up to the population demand as well. So the entirety of this dynamic still speaks to the fact that we are not thinking about the economy long-term enough to take strategic short-term steps that would help us solve the problem in a more sustainable way. So I think that realization has evolved more recently. But particularly, most of the items on the supplementary budget targets largely around relieving the average Nigerian, from the crisis or the cost of living crisis they're faced with. But then again, it was largely expected.
Okay, so let's look at the economic implications of this. So a supplementary budget of 2.18 trillion puts the 2023 budget at around 24 trillion naira. In terms of the potential economic implications, what are we looking at? How might it affect the overall fiscal position of the country? In fact, will it also influence growth in any way, inflation, employment, or any other economic indicators? Because we do see a large amount that was put there for construction of bridges and roads. And we know construction is one of the ways that government oftentimes helps to get the economy jump-started. So what are we seeing in terms of how this supplementary budget will affect the overall fiscal position of the country?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think first and foremost that some of these line items will spill to the next year. Because there's no way you're going to spend all that amount of money in just 2 months. And take into cognizance the fact that December is almost here, and you have just 50% of December really active for work in terms of even legislative and policy and social intervention engagement. So there's going to be a spill up of that supplementary block in terms of spending and all that into Q1 next year. However, the big ticket conversation again is how you're going to fund that budget, especially within the crunch time we have left. Number two would also be the fact that, again, the risk of inflation, because so much amount of money will be pumped back into the economy. But then the risk of inflation is also, can be looked at differently because you only have about 100 billion available for conditional cash transfers and all that. But that's, again, a lot of money that can literally trigger money supply, especially in context to the festive activity or the festive period that we're about to, get into. So yeah, there are different implications for it. I also fear that there's a lot of rush around the supplementary bit and how much of this project can actually kickstart immediately. What are the quality control dynamics, the contractual elements around it, and how do we ensure that they all tie into the overall sustainability program of the Nigerian economy? That's assuming there is one. So I really do not see that sustainability element in the scheme of things, that ability to really drive spending, because again, you can literally put this in the same bucket or the same bucket list as other recurrent / capital expenditure that has been made all through the year. What kind of impact have they really had in terms of improving the quality of life of the average Nigerian? So yeah, the rush, possible impact on inflation, impact coming from the fact that we are dealing with festival activities and all that. Lots of corporate institutions are winding down already. So how do you want to scale this within the time left and ensuring that it also delivers sustainability? Is also the big question I'm bothered with.
Well, I want to stay with how this sort of changes the fiscal position, because we know that the federal government secured an $800 million loan from the World Bank to pay cash transfers about 25,000 naira to 15 million households. And that was to cover 2 months, October and November. So what we've also seen is that the president, that's Bola Tinubu, approved that an additional month should be funded by the federal government. That would take us to December. And that is what the 100 billion naira is for. But a supplementary budget raises questions about where the additional funding for this supplement will come from. So are there implications for borrowing, revenue generation, or even adjustments in existing allocations? What do we know about in terms of how much of this supplementary budget is being funded by further borrowing, and possibly how it affects the debt conversation for Nigeria?
Yes, there are really implications for debt, the implications for revenue mobilization as well. One of the things I see happening is, the almost easiest possible way out for the Nigerian government right now is through borrowing of some sort, or having very mutual agreements with donors or funders, as the case may be, to go into targeted intervention funding. So you'd expect that the 100 billion will be funded through a targeted intervention in partnership with XYZ and all of that. So more structured borrowing approaches are likely going to be the case, in this point, knowing fully well that you already have a backlog of so much amounts of money that you still need to refund these institutions. Again, the big question again is, how do you spend $800 million in 2 months? Claiming that you disbursed monies to 15 million households, right? There has to be an impact report to show how these monies were disbursed, who benefited what, and people coming out saying, oh, actually was a beneficiary from this and all that. All of those things actually help the confidence of the average Nigerian to know that the government is doing something right. Right. So there are a lot of implications. Even the citizens are not aware, and there is a lack of confidence and trust in the process ongoing right now, in terms of administering some of these social interventions. So I agree with you, there are implications. And again, how do these implications impact on future budgets or future revenue positions when it comes to paybacks, debt servicing, and interest rate and all of that? We also had the World Bank president and the IMF DG say in Morocco last couple of months ago that that interest rates aren't going to go down anytime soon. So how do you juxtapose all of these borrowings or these financial commitments with the fact that globally we're expecting more rise in interest rates in 2024? So they're very deep concerns, all right, and the fact that we're not communicating enough. Transparency sounds like an expensive word in this conversation, but it has to be part of what should be in the mainstream of how government wants to raise the finance, how they want to track impact, how they want to ensure that the right block of beneficiaries are accessing this funding, and how it ties up, to the overall development agenda of the new administration.
So it's not just the conditional cash transfer that's also under the spotlights with this supplementary budget. We know that it's also aimed at covering additional spending in defense as well. The government wants to build on what they say are the positives they've seen in recent times, as well as welfare packages such as wage awards and conditional cash transfers agreed with organized labor, which is still quite up in the air, because even as of yesterday, we know that there's back and forth between the government and labor. But what do you think the expected impact of the cash transfer payments on the economy would be? Because we seem to have a situation where oftentimes where wages go up, inflation and ordinary prices also go up as well. But as I mentioned earlier, construction is one of the ways government oftentimes gets money circulating. Wouldn't we also be expecting to see money circulating positively around the economy with some of these cash payments and wage awards for organized labor, even though they're just a percentage of those who really probably need the help across the country?
Well, there are a lot of mixed narratives that are shaping that outlook. So take, for instance, we are in the heat of a festive season, number one. Number two, inflation, particularly food inflation, is rising faster than any amount or the pace at which these interventions are going out. And which will mean that at the point at which those monies will be in circulation, it may impact on money in supply. But if you double that with the fact that inflation is rising at a faster rate, then there's literally going to be more crisis looming sometime in the future. So we're worried that it's not sustainable, in terms of the way it's constructed, the way it's being rolled out, it's not sustainable. We also have the conversation that in terms of increasing with the clamor to increase wages because you also have an increasing cost of living crisis to deal with, right? People have to spend more amount of money buying a basket of tomatoes. So I would want to think of two extremes, all right? Whilst these relief programs are really important, you almost cannot stop them. They need to happen. You also need to think about not just the inflationary impact, but work a bit downwards to find out what are the root causal dynamics that are impacting, for instance, on the basket of tomatoes. Nigeria is one of the largest producers of tomatoes in the world. So you cannot only tie that to the Russian-Ukraine war as it were, but a very strong infrastructural deficit in the country and all of that. Now, if those 50% of those things are dealt with, you have a situation where food inflation will shrink. And once that shrinks, labor would not necessarily come for you in terms of increasing wages and all that. So rising wages are as a result of the increased cost of living crisis. Now, if you keep increasing wages, also the risk of inflation. So it's like a vicious circle that has no sustainability conversation in view in terms of how it's currently being approached. So whilst I agree that these relief programs are really key, I would also want to suggest for a proper design of those interventions so that on one hand, they're dealing with the crisis we are faced with and the people that are faced with those crises. So, for instance, when the UK launched the cost of living fund, it was designed to reach local people through structured and properly registered charity bodies, and who are being recognized with the Charity Commission, Company House, as the case may be. Now, you don't have that really structured public body that delivers that kind of value. And you have that widespread network across Nigeria. So you don't even know who's accessing this funding to start with. So the fact that it's a dark economics, also brings more worry on the inflationary impact because you're wondering if the laborers who need this increase in wages or if Nigerians who actually need these cash transfers will get them. Because either way, it's going to impact on inflation, possibly going to impact on inflation.
A lot of questions, and there was one point you made earlier that I want us to sort of go back to, and that's the fact that the budgetary or the supplementary budget also mentions 200 billion naira for capital supplementation to address urgent requests from various parts of the country. And there's a conversation, and even your answer just now in terms of the conditional cash transfers raises the question of the how and the who, and through who's even monitoring this situation. So in terms of the criteria for this allocation of urgent various regional situations and how they impact regional development and economic disparities, what do you think we're looking at here? Do we have enough information? Again, this is a supplementary budget coming in about 2 months to the end of the year. As you mentioned earlier, we're getting to the festive season. By the second week of December, a lot of official activity will be winding down, companies winding down. Is this even really the time? Yes, we can understand the economic pressures that the country is going through as well, but could this really have also waited given where it's coming in and when it's coming in? Gospel?
Yeah, so that's my worry. That's my worry, and the fact that you have a high situation where consumer or consumption habits during the Yuletide season always spiral. They always go in excess. You have possible cases of rising inflation in December due to the consumption habits of citizens. And safe to say that if this conditional cash transfer gets to them, there's more likelihood that it goes deeply into consumption and and all that into the construct of that consumption habit than helping to relieve the pain, as it were. So again, is there a good timing? We've always had timing issues when it comes to rolling out interventions. Then secondly, no nation has really grown and developed over time on the grounds of conditional cash transfers. All right, so if you look at a lot of things on those supplementary budgets, these are line items that could have been dealt with if you have a more cultural or institutional ideology that's driven towards inclusion. All right, so every time now and then you're trying to repair something on the Eco Bridge or something on the Third Mainland Bridge, but if you pass through that bridge, you can see the failing and dilapidating state of that bridge. So why is there so much effort in trying to raise finance to sort of like use the word fix quote unquote the damages. All right. So whereas what you need is actually to grow more infrastructure, grow the infrastructure base, provide more bridges, alternative routes, improve the transportation network in the country. And these are the sustainable elements that would require for us to begin to, delve more deeply into prosperity. On the question of if we have more information, I believe we have more than enough information in Nigeria. Nigeria is one of those places where you have data everywhere. It's abundant like water, but yet it's still hard to get. Part of why it's hard to get is because the ideology around the use, the onboarding, and the deployment of data for social intervention is also a failed one. Culturally, we are not a people that love to read, love to interrogate information. We're not curious in the sense. So that culture has woven deeply into our social intervention design and our programs, such that any intervention can be introduced and rolled out as a dark economy intervention. You cannot necessarily define who is accessing what, where, and how understand it's going to generate the right impacts and all that. Nobody's responsible for anything. All right. So the data is already there. You have the NIM, you have banks, you have a lot of places where you can generate the information from if you choose to organize the market of existing data to start with. So for me, I say look at these things more from an angle of institutional failure, trying to just get things done, throw money around, no accountability, no institutional ideology approach to helping people move from where they are to, growing, becoming prosperous. So the cost of living crisis is the crisis that presents an opportunity to get more Nigerians out of the poverty net. But you cannot achieve that with cash transfers only, or you cannot achieve that by trying to patch somewhere on the bridge. You need to fix the structural elements that, reform-wise, to get people over the line. However, the relief programs are important to restore hope and confidence, towards a better tomorrow. And that's what the message has always been.
Okay. So let's look at this holistically, sort of in a trend conversation now, in terms of how this particular supplementary budget and even the timing of it compares to past supplementary budgets in Nigeria, if any, in terms of size, focus, and impact. Where would you place this supplementary budget?
Well, I see it as part of the game strategy to sort of restore confidence or gain confidence by the current administration. There's a lot of pronouncements and commitments have been made since May 29th. And I think this is just one of those things, just adding up to the current budget phase. My worry is that you're going to have a lot of moving parts, meaning that loads and loads of the projects and supplementary, even currently existing 2023 budgetary activities will be spilled into 2024. The argument a lot of times is that the government wants to be able to kickstart the 2024 budget from January 1st. And for me, I think that's really optics. If you really have a very close view as regards what's happening, realize there's a lot of spillovers of budgetary engagement. And we're not so very good when it comes to capital projects and recurrent projects. So being able to define what is capital and what is recurrent are also very blurry when you go through the Nigerian budget in detail. All right, capital items are not clearly defined, recurrent items are not clearly defined. So it's just a mismatch and spill off. So I see a lot of economic mismanagement within the bulk of how budgets are being designed, rolled over, and how projects are being managed, within that cycle. And the supplementary budget now looks like a bridge to manage for that irresponsibility and lack of discipline to start with. So that's the way I literally say it, to realize this. And the most painful part that it doesn't tie up towards that sustainability and change the economic trajectory towards prosperity, which is exactly what the Nigerian people need now. So this culture has existed for a long time, and it's high time that Nigerians deserve better. And since we are already in the new administration, it's just safe to say that the thinking caps behind the president need to begin to support the process of inclusion more rigorously. Yeah.
Okay. In the long run, this budget is going through. We know that the Federal Executive Council has approved it. They want to build on their successes in defense and other areas of spending. But when we also look at the budget that's been presented by the Tinubu administration, which we're expecting to hit the National Assembly in November, are we seeing some more specific towards the economic direction or even the economic adjustments that we want to see or that we expect to see from the Tinubu administration?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at economic adjustments, one look at it from two levels. So you have monies to be spent. I mean, it's safe to say that the Nigerian budget is not even enough, technically, in terms of the ideal funding Nigeria requires to break through as a nation, the ideal funding. But outside the conversation of what an ideal funding should look like, even with the funding we have now, we are not even prioritizing where they should go to. All right, there is no significant capital-based, high-level investment in sectors that will bring about the high returns we need. For instance, digital services. All right, the Nigerian GDP hosts about 56% of the GDP are services sector based. But right now, we don't even have a national services sector policy. We don't have a policy to budget, to MDA per and all that to tell us exactly how Nigeria seeks to maximize 56% of its economic activities that are services based. And also, if you look at it in context of the global trade right now, digital services surpassed goods traded by 15% globally last year, which is to tell you that we are aligned properly with how the global economy is evolving in terms of services and digital services. So, in the same way, it's fair to say that you expect the policy directions and all that to support areas within the non-oil space that can give us the low-hanging fruits we need in terms of efforts, promoting talent, and all of that. But you don't see that movement in that direction. All right. So the argument for me will be even the existing funds we have, how are we reprioritizing our spend? All right. So, and I've not seen that within the context of the current budget. It just seems to a large extent like a copy and paste. You mentioned you want to capitalize on the gains on defense and insecurity and all that. But if you look at it critically, if you ask the average Nigerian right now, do you feel safer today than you were last year? The answer is likely going to be a no. So if the average Nigerian does not feel safer, it tells us to a large extent that even the gains that have been, in quotes, gained in the past still need to be worked on because the economy and the doing business environment is still largely unsafe, than what it was last year. So there are so many conflicting angles to it. What I would just propose is, even with the monies we have now, we need to reprioritize our design and structuring of this funding as to where it goes. It's not so much about increasing the percentage of education budget, 26%, which of course I strongly agree with that to happen. But even the 8% you have, how are you reworking education policies, education institutions in Nigeria to ensure that they deliver the quality of talent and human capital we need to move the country forward? All right, designing JAMB, new general mathematics and all that as a one-size-fits-all is already a failed approach. All right, you have different levels of mental prowess for young people in Nigeria. There are different levels of creativity. You need to be able to design a system that works for the type of young people you have. All right, so until we begin to design educational reforms or education structure to be tailored to our context and not just our realities, but our uniqueness that brings us and promotes us to the world, we are not ready for this conversation. Even if you double or triple the Nigerian budget in 2024, 2025, as far as the structure of its spend and the policy dynamics still remain the way they are right now, Nigeria can never break free.
All right, Gospel Obele, Chief Economist for Streetnomics. Thank you so much for joining me. I know as we continue into this with the first budget and now supplementary budget from the Tinubu administration, there are definitely going to be more conversations surrounding that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. All right, we have international headlines coming up, and also when we come back, we'll look at the mergers and acquisitions landscape in sub-Saharan Africa. Do stay with us.